Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we've got a really good friend of mine and a really special guest for this program, Lorelei McBroom. Uh, I'm going to let her introduce herself, but she has done some really cool stuff in the music industry. And if you're looking to make it as a musician, her advice definitely holds a lot of value. So without further ado, go ahead and tell us all about what you've done.
Well, hi, Carter. Thank you for having me. Um, First and foremost, to just get to the root of it, I toured with Pink Floyd back in 1989. It was the first time I'd ever toured. I did it with my sister and another young lady that I had met a couple weeks prior. And that got me started on touring the world with some of the biggest rock bands that have ever been. Um, I followed Pink Floyd tours with the Rolling Stones. I did the Grammys with Lou Reed. I have performed with Chic. Uh, I've actually, after a break to have start a family, toured with Rod Stewart. I'm currently working with the Australian Pink Floyd. Um, I've worked with Steve Hackett, uh, Johnny Kemp. Um, it's been a lot of interesting people. Mark Colley, country artist, Albert Collins. I can't remember everyone, but it's been a great adventure for me. Initially, I wanted to be a solo recording artist. I still have an ambition to do my own because I am a lead singer. But the opportunity to tour the world with these A-level bands has been incredible because I've been able to see a lot of interesting places, meet people from different cultures, which I love, um, and someone else is paying for it. So,
Yeah.
and the best part is I get to sing and perform and be on stage, which I love to do. And it's a really nice way to make a living because I've done other stuff. I've done temp work. I've been a secretary. I've been an usher. I mean, all kind of things when I was not singing when my son was quite young, and I felt it was better to stay home with him. So I do understand kind of both sides of the coin, and I like this one.
Yeah, I can imagine. Uh,
Mm.
a lot of us work to get to that side of the coin for a good reason. So how did you get into your career as a musician? You know, some people it sort of happened by accident, others were very intentional in their pursuit, and some are kind of in between.
Well, I have two older sisters who were both professional dancers. One of them was modeling and went into modeling, and then that led to acting. The other one had tremendous talent, or she has tremendous talent as a choreographer. She also got into acting, directing, screenwriting, songwriting. So I wanted to be like my big sisters. My mother, who was a doctor, started out as a concert pianist. So she and my father had me taking piano from age 4. That introduced me to music quite young. Then by the time I was 7, I started playing guitar and I was working in a group that was singing. And we were doing folk songs and singing in different schools and traveling around doing that. So I got comfortable with the idea of being on stage and performing very, very young, and enjoying it. And I just decided by the time I was 16, out of my loves, dance, acting, and singing, that I'd have a better chance of making a living if I went into singing. So that's where that started. As far as the professional part of it, um, one of those older sisters uh, introduced me to Nile Rodgers because when they were growing up, they lived next door to him in the Bronx at one point in his life where he came to live with his stepfather. And Nile gave me some of my earliest professional opportunities. He had me singing background vocals for Teddy Pendergrass. He ended up hooking me up with Philip Bailey, the lead singer from Earth, Wind, and Fire, and we wrote a song together. He recorded one of my songs on Sister Sledge. So that gave me an entree on a very high level, as well as one of the musicians that I knew. One of the only musicians in New York that I knew was Anthony Jackson. He's a bass player that is well known for the bass line on "For the Love of Money" by the OJs.
Oh yeah.
Okay, well, I met him in Los Angeles when he was on tour with Shaka Khan. And he gave me his phone number. He said, if you ever come to New York, call me. I did. So he introduced me to some really, really quality top A-level players. So between those connections and my drive to want to do something, and walking into opportunities that led to, me recording and whatnot, I got there. And eventually I got a record deal on Capitol, but unfortunately at that time there was a lot of turmoil going on within the company, and everyone from the president to my A&R people, everyone got fired. So I had no one inside the label to fight for me, and I got dropped. But Pink Floyd was already a part of my resume because I had met them while I was working on the album. And they had a girl leave, so they called me. I got to go back again, tour with my sister again, which was awesome. And one thing led to another, so I continued with the touring because it was easier to get gigs as a background singer than trying to battle through getting another record deal, which I did try to do, but it was just difficult, especially at that time. The compartmentalization of people based on their race was much more overt than it is now. And I'm really more of a pop singer. I started doing folk music, not gospel. I was exposed to a lot of rock and roll in high school because I went to a private school with a lot of Jewish kids who were into that and introduced me to Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd. And my little sister was into the Stones and the Babies. I mean, there's lots of groups that I got into. Joni Mitchell, James Taylor, Linda Ronstadt, so there was a whole phase of that 70s California rock stuff. I love that because it had a folk influence that I could relate to coming from a background of playing folk guitar. Anyhow, fortunately for me, I was in the right place at the right time. I'd made relationships that led to referrals. That's how I got the Stones. I knew a record guy who introduced me to the right people to get an audition. It was not easy though. I had to sing with 200 girls. It took me 2 tries to get them. But because Mick did like something about me, the second time through, he invited me to join the tour, which I did, and I was in their first IMAX film, Rolling Stones at the Max, which was incredible to be on a 30-foot screen, and it sounded like being in the show. Really intense, loud, but clear sound. And fortunately, because Mick liked me, we had a great interaction on screen. Which was fun. I could be as much of a ham as I can, and yet be that sexy, rock and roll diva also.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that makes a really good segue to the next question, which are, what are your favorite and least favorite stories from your career thus far? I know just from being around you and being backstage at a couple Aussie Floyd shows, you've got some really cool stories to tell. So, I'm looking forward to your answer on this one.
Well, the juiciest stories will be saved for my memoirs, but I would say the worst thing was the racism that I experienced through the course of my record deal, knowing that I had a quality pop album. But I was in the R&B department because I'm Black, and finding out after I was no longer on the label that the pop department had approached the right of people to say, we want to take this album. And they were told no. And the only reason was because I was Black. So that was very frustrating because Niall and I did a really good album. It was around the time when Jody Watley was popular with I'm Looking for a New Love. It was at the end of the 80s. I had some good dance songs, but I had songs. They weren't the kind of thing that we've got now where the lyrics really don't tell a story. They're just kind of lowest common denominator very sexualized, but in a vulgar kind of way, as opposed to the poeticness that I loved in an artist like a Joni Mitchell, which is why I like people like Prince. I've liked so many different artists, Steely Dan, because they had a substance, and that's what was interesting to me. So that was the most difficult, especially coming out of the 70s, where there was a tremendous blend. When you look at the influence of a Hendrix, you look at the influence of Sly and the Family Stone, Earth, Wind and Fire, all these bands, Steely Dan, they were blending different elements of music and taking it to another level and making it their own. Rock and roll is black music. And for me to be told, you know, not that my album was so hardcore rock and roll, but as I was coming up, being discouraged from pursuing a rock direction, which I definitely wanted to pursue. And that's, I think, part of why I fit well with groups like the Stones and Rod Stewart and other people that I've worked with, because I understand that the rock and roll sensibility, but I associate that with black music. Um, anyway, so as far as a positive, I would say the most exuberant experience I've ever had was being on tour with Pink Floyd in Russia. They had been starved from Western music for quite a while, and it was a new thing for Western bands to be allowed to perform there. Um, it started out kind of scary because we would perform the new album in the first half of the show. Second half of the show, we were playing the more familiar songs from Dark Side of the Moon and songs from Wish You Were Here. And so the people in the far back of the audience were the poor people. They would come rushing to the stage and they were being dragged off. And we didn't know where they were taking them. It looked almost like KGB officers were taking them to the gulags or something. It was very frightening. So the band told the promoters, we cannot have this. And they made an agreement, sit during the first half of the show, second half of the show, let the people come. And did they come? They were throwing their hats on stage, the military guys, the police. They were throwing money during the song Money. We were crying. They were crying. It was so wonderful. And that has been memorialized in a photo that's in Nick Mason's book about Pink Floyd, where my sister and Rachel and I are holding a sign that says "Make love, not war," and we're wearing our military hats. That, I think, is the highlight experience so far.
Yeah, that is probably my favorite story to hear you tell as well.
Mm.
That is it's I can only imagine what it must have been like being like the first major Western act to go behind the Iron Curtain after Perestroika.
Well, we weren't the first. I believe Paul McCartney was the first, but we were in the top three.
Yeah, I mean, I just remember from my review of rock and roll history that, like, you know, the first 5 acts happened very far apart from one each other, and they were all basically just the biggest of the best at the time.
Yeah, yeah.
So what does an ideally productive day look like for you as a musician, and how does it change now versus like when you were younger? What and why made you change the routine?
Well, for one thing, I tour a lot. I'm usually on tour 8 or even 9 months out of the year. So the time that I have at home is really precious to me. Being on tour is about the routine of trying to take care of whatever personal business that I have up until sound check, which starts generally at 4 o'clock, with the Australian Pink Floyd anyway, who I do most of my touring with. Then from about 4 to the showtime is dedicated to having dinner, deciding what we're going to wear, maybe finishing up emails or, you know, Facebook posts or whatever, but getting ready for the show, warming up. Then we do the show, which lasts for a couple of hours. Then after the show's over, depending on where I am, usually if I'm in the United States on tour, we're back on the bus by a certain time. We sleep on the bus, go to the next show, and we get used to that routine. Fortunately, in the UK, where I just came home from, I was with my friend Dave, that you know, Dave Fowler, our lead guitar player, and our IT guy, and he does all of our videos. Um, he lives in England, so we drive back and forth from the shows that are relatively close to him up to as far away as like 4 hours. Like we drove to Wales. But then we'll go back to his house. So that's more like having a job where you show up at work, you do your job, and then you go home. And I really like that, because to have that sense of being, having a bit more privacy than being in a communal situation 24 hours is more restful. Because, you know, they can have differences about how the temperature is on the bus and who's being too loud, and, you know, the drinking people and all of that. And so you get away from that and you have a little bit of your own sanctuary. So I really enjoyed that. When we were in the north, we stayed at a friend of his house who allowed us to visit with him. So that was cool. As far as what I do when I'm at home, I also make jewelry. So I spend time, like I have been since I got back and had a couple of days to rest, creating new things to put on my website to sell. I have been doing this since I think about 2012, making my jewelry available to the public. I started making jewelry when I was 12 years old as a child, because my stepmother one summer taught me how to do it. So I do that. I also work on projects with my sister. She and I are making an album. And so we have logistical details we've got to sort out for that. We've got a cruise coming up on Cruise to the Edge. That's the Yes sponsored cruise that usually travels in the Florida area to the Mexican Riviera. So I've got things to plan for that.
The one I'm always too broke to attend.
Yeah, it is quite expensive. But the thing that I love about that is you usually think of a cruise with people in ball gowns and, you know, dancing to, you know, Frank Sinatra and that type of music. It's nothing like that. These people who are, you know, 60, 70-year-olds, 50, 40 even, but mostly I would say 60-year-olds, they're in that retirement age. They listened to rock and roll growing up. So that's what they want to hear on a cruise. You're not going to hear the slow, you know, schmaltzy type of stuff. These people are wearing their Pink Floyd t-shirts and their Led Zeppelin t-shirts and cool hats and bandanas, and, you know, they're reliving their childhood in a way. But yeah, I really enjoy that aspect of it.
Yeah, it seems like a great time. I remember the lineup was stacked last year. I was really sad I wasn't able to be there.
Yeah, I've seen some really great bands.
Yeah, Marco Miniman is one of my favorite drummers. So anytime his name is on a new record, I have to give it a listen. It's obligatory. So are there any favorite like personal management or budgeting tools you use? Like, you know, I'm big on like Evernote. I love Google Calendars. You know, there's a bunch of little tools and things I use to keep myself more or less put together. What are your favorites?
Well, I don't have a lot. One, though, that I really do enjoy, it's something that Dave, our friend, created called My Tour app.
Yes.
My Tour book, excuse me. That's a new app that he's releasing to the public. I think it's still in beta, but it's been used on several tours, including the Aussie tour, the Nick Mason tour, Mark Knopfler tour. So it's definitely getting some good use. That's a great way to organize when you have a tour. It gives the tour manager a way to put in your schedule so you know everyone can check to see what they've got going on. It sends out notifications. You have a way to, at each location, look up what's nearby so that when you have a day off, you can find restaurants, you can find golfing, you can find theaters, and other forms of entertainment, bars, restaurants. So that's a great way to stay organized on tour. Because you can also send notes, you can put in your guest lists and get those approved, and it's all in one place. I definitely use Google Calendar, so I can get notifications about things so I know what I've got to follow up on. I've learned how to live on the road in terms of accounting, like doing banking online, handling, whatever cards I have online, shopping online, um, all different forms of communication online. I have voice over IP ways of calling people. I use WhatsApp. I use Facebook. I use Google Voice. Um, all of those tools make it possible for me to stay connected. In the old days, you didn't have that. You go away on tour, and unless you wanted to spend a lot of money on a long distance call, you didn't. We could sometimes do faxing at one point, but even that wasn't something that you would do on a regular basis. So it was a lot more isolated.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine. And you've already kind of answered most of this question indirectly,
Mhm.
but I'm going to ask it anyway. What do you usually do on your tour bus or like on flights, like when you have just long stretches of idle time to do nothing with?
I watch stuff. I love to watch movies or documentaries. So I download stuff into my phone if I know I'm going to be traveling for a long period. And if there's entertainment available, like on a flight, I'll watch what's on the plane. But every once in a while, I've been on flights where there is no entertainment. So I can either read stuff in my phone or watch stuff on my phone, or I have a tablet. So I do that.
Excellent. How has streaming changed the revenue model you've used, if at all?
Well, because I don't have a release that I can compare it to, I can only go by what I've seen in the press from other people. Like, um, I can't think of his name right now. The guy that did Happy, Pharrell.
Oh, yeah. That's the one.
And he
Pharrell
and he was
Williams.
saying that he made some ridiculously low amount of money, like under $30,000 for streaming of his video Happy, which is
I believe that.
insane.
I
You
believe that
know,
entirely.
So, I mean, this is what I keep saying in terms of the way the business has changed. It's the original model has been destroyed. People can't keep up with what it used to be. The record companies are not putting out the money that they used to. They became more and more dependent on producers to actually do the work that the old school labels used to do, which is why I believe the quality of a label like Motown was so consistent. They had a staff of songwriters, they had staff of producers, they had people who helped design their look, they had choreographers. They really created an entire package for you as a record company. In the towards the late 80s into the 90s, they were expecting the producers to do all the heavy lifting. They had to kind of train the artists and work out the kinks. People were jumping immediately into these huge tours when they had never really been on any kind of low level bar type of scene, performing where you really learn your craft. Um, Now, mind you, I didn't do a lot of that, but I did do some of it before I got Pink Floyd. And also, as I said, being that I'd been performing in front of people since I was 6, I had a sense of how to be on stage. There's a lot of people that you can see come along new that they don't have any touring experience. They don't have very much stage performance experience, but they're expected to do this grandiose thing. That's not as effective. If you look at somebody like an Amy Winehouse who came up through the club scene, you could tell, because there's a certain quality to the performance in an artist like that. That is what is missing to me right now. And I don't think the recording part of it is going to go back to instant platinum albums. I don't think it's going to ever go back to that. I
Yeah.
think that what's going to make people the most money is, can you perform live? Because people will go to a concert. I've seen that. I mean, I make a living because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. That seems to be a pretty common response. It's like late 80s, early 90s, all the major labels were no longer independent. They'd all started conglomerating at that point. Obviously, now you've got it like there's literally only 5 major media companies that own pretty much everything. And one label, Sony BMG, outsizes the entire independent music market combined. So
Wow.
there's when musicians today complain about there being less flexibility for them to break into the scene, I absolutely believe them. Because when you look at the economic metrics of what's happening, an increased barrier to entry is really just demanded by the conditions that have been created here. And let
Well,
me apologize. The sun is being truly annoying and trying to find good lighting today. Shift
okay.
here a little, see if that improves any. Yeah, it's a little better. Alrighty. Next question. What are your favorite and least favorite parts about working in and around the music industry?
I really don't have a lot to complain about. As I have been on tours, like with the Rolling Stones, for example, where we had our own plane, where they literally I think it was in Prague, they opened the airport for us. We were driven onto the tarmac and to our plane and left. So I've been spoiled where there is no sleeping on a bus. If you ride on a bus, it's for a short ride, maybe like I did with Pink Floyd in Italy, where it was easy. The only way to get to the venue, we had to take a bus for the day. But I always had a hotel room at night. I really do enjoy that as opposed to sleeping on a bus. A tour bus can be uncomfortable, like I said, because of the temperature thing. The guys want it cold, the girls want it warm, people are snoring, stuff like that. But that's so trivial to me that I really can't complain. I feel like I have one of the best jobs in the world. I'm not flying first class necessarily, but I'm comfortable. My flight is paid for. My bags are paid for. My taxi to and from the airport is paid for. I get to stay in nice hotels. We're not in like crappy motel lodge type of places where we go. I get to go to beautiful exotic places. Like I went to Monaco this year. We went to Istanbul last year. I've been to Malta. I've been to Dubai. I've been to Tel Aviv. Um, different parts of Canada. So that is really special, and I really can't complain.
Yeah, that's so all the little things come with the territory, right?
Mm,
There you go. So what would you say your worst habit in terms of day-to-day self-management is? Like for me, it would be a mixture of procrastinating and spending too much money on food. My palate is richer than my blood, unfortunately. And I really need to watch that.
um, I used to be very athletic. I was very athletic in school. I ran track. I did gymnastics. I played pretty much all the sports that was offered to the girls. Um, I had horses. Um, when I first moved away from home, my roommate and I used to do a workout routine. I took dance classes. But after having a child, by the time I settled into my 40s, I started to get lazier. And so I would say that's um, my greatest weakness is getting back into the discipline of a physical regimen. Now, with the Aussie Floyd Tour show, I do dancing. It's not really that vigorous except for one song, Run Like Hell. We have to keep our arms moving pretty much through the entire song, back, forth, you
Yeah.
know. So that's good cardio. But I would do myself a favor to get back into some exercise to tighten my legs up. I used to have really pretty legs. They're still nice, but they're not as toned as they were when I was younger.
Yeah, I know the feeling. I miss my six pack, but man, when you're a skinny little shit like me, you miss the gym for 1 month and all of your toned anything is just gone to your metabolism.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So what is the most common mistake you would say you see young musicians making? Or, what is the most common mistake you think musicians make in general when it comes to, their careers?
Well, those are two different categories. Musicians are one category, and people that are trying to pursue careers as an artist is another. I think that in the age of American Idol, it's misled people into believing that that is the right approach to get a record deal, to get ahead, to get attention. And the thing that's so misleading about the American Idol voice approach is that these people generally, or at least I'm not as familiar with the voice because I don't watch those shows. I used to watch American Idol when it first came out because I was curious. But the idea of getting everyone to sing the same style of music when it doesn't necessarily suit their voices is stupid to me.
Yeah.
I come from an era where having a uniqueness and an individual sound and style was critical to being successful. So, and I love to give this analogy. You could listen to Shaka Khan, Aretha Franklin, Patti LaBelle, and Gladys Knight, and you could tell all of them apart because each one of them had their own sound. Nowadays, I don't hear that. There's the similarity between Katy Perry, Rihanna, um, and a couple of other girls, I don't know their names. It's too close. And then it's like, well, what is your style? What is your song style? What is your vocal style? Those things need to be defined. So to me, the most important thing someone can do is find your own style. Now,
Yeah.
I look at a band like Dirty Loops. They're a Swedish band, trio. They're kind of a jazz fusion band. They're popish too, though. But what made them work is they took big pop hits and they did them their way. And so they defined a style that you can tell is very much them. I mean, there are videos all over the place of people imitating them, redoing their songs, redoing their covers. And that to me is what makes an artist, is have your own style.
Yeah, absolutely. Cut back on the compression. Don't don't make your music to suit the market because your A&R told you to. Make something that's
Exactly.
you and have the
Right.
record label figure out how to best market you
Yeah,
rather
that's what
than.
they used to do.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like time and time again interviewing some of these musicians that have been around the scene for a minute, that remember the pre-streaming era, that, you get that response a lot is like, man, it used to be bottom up, but now everything is top down, and
Yeah,
Conglomerate pretty much did that because now you've got a bunch of money people running the music industry, right?
that's the problem, is that it
Music is
used to
just a
be run,
they
it
don't
used,
understand the process that goes into it.
yeah, because it used to be run by people who either played an instrument or they knew how to arrange or they had actually spent time producing something in the studio. I was taught by one of those type of guys. When I went to UCLA, after I decided I wanted to be a singer, and I told my mom that's what I wanted to do. She said, that's fine, but you have to go to school and learn your business. And UCLA had started an extension program in the music business, and they had people who were veteran professionals teaching these classes. And my production teacher was Nick Vinay. Nick Vinay signed the Beach Boys to Capitol Records. He produced Tobacco Road for Lou Rawls, which was a big hit in that time. He produced the Stone Ponies, which was the Linda Ronstadt band. That was her first band. Um, he produced Ricky Nelson and Juice Newton, and he was really an amazing guy. And we were close. He was a mentor for me, very hard on me. But when one day he said to the class, the only difference between this girl and Barbara Streisand is she's got curlier hair. It shocked me. It just really shocked me that he actually really believed in me that much. I didn't know because he was always being critical and being rough on me. But it
Yeah.
helped to shape the way that I see things, the way that I judge musicians and artists. I would say, as far as musicians, because I skipped that, I think that musicians should know how to read. And I think that they should have the versatility to do anything, because my son's father is that kind of musician. He's a trumpet player. He can read anything, he can play anything, and it has allowed him to make a living as a musician because he could always make the call.
Absolutely.
Um,
I tell other metal guitarists, like, no, tab isn't good enough. Learn sheet music. You will thank yourself. And I normally get met with scoffs, which
yeah,
amazes me.
I know,
Like,
because it's not a cool thing to
the
do,
Beatles
but
didn't learn sheet music.
it gives you a foundation that you can take anywhere, and it's like learning a language.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I always start my beginning students, 8-year-olds. The very first thing they learn from me is how to read the staff and the circle of fifths. Because if you
Hmm.
know those two things, you can teach yourself any instrument. It doesn't matter
Right,
what it is. As long as it follows Western tuning, you can figure out how to play it if you can put the time in at that point.
right.
Um, Shifting gears ever so slightly, how should your approach differ between being like a pay-to-play session type of musician such as yourself and being like a stakeholder in a band in terms of like contracts, creative approach, and like promotional approach?
Well, when you work for someone else as a background singer, for example, um, generally they provide the contract to you, and there's certain things that I want to be sure are in it, provisions to make sure that my transportation and my accommodations are paid for, that I get a certain amount of money every day, um, spending money. Sometimes that money can be for the food that I need to get, but usually they also provide meals at least twice a day. And there's usually a rider for, depending on what the situation is. Like if I'm working not with the Australian Pink Floyd, but if I'm working with another band where I'm more of a featured lead singer, then I can get, certain things that I want backstage in my dressing room, and like that. What were the other circumstances you were asking?
In terms of creative approach, promotional approach, and then the contract side of things.
Well, there's a lot of new approaches that you can use in terms of advertising what you're doing because of the internet. A lot of people use social media. People are big on Instagram. Um, I think it tends to be a little older audience on Facebook. There's other uh, newer apps that have come out that I don't know the names of, but I've been hearing, that there's new ways to do things. So those mediums are good because some of them can be free. If you really want to be effective, you need to spend money so that you keep that image of whatever it is you're promoting in people's faces. Of course, there's traditional radio and television if you have the budget for that. Um, some people even still do flyers, promotional flyers for an event. Um, there are people who you can pay who have large mailing lists and rosters, and those people can promote your projects for you, and they'll use different online outlets, whether it be um, not Yelp, but there are websites that are like that for entertainment, where people go to look for things to do, and they'll advertise what you're doing in there, things like that.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense. How about creative approach? I know that one of the tropes of the music industry is that hired gun who shows up and thinks he's the lead guitarist already. Any advice on learning to sort of blend with a project rather than make the project blend with you?
Well, that's all a matter of a person's personality. I mean, you have to know how to not only coexist with other people, but how to be in a group. Now, some people are natural leaders, some people are natural bullies, some people are so insecure that they want to make everything about them, with some narcissistic personalities, which is part of why they're driven to be on stage in the first place. They want the attention. Um, but that's something you just have to learn. I mean, one thing, it was a very telling experience I went through when auditioning for the Rolling Stones. One of the girls, after having gone through 200 girls, there was myself and another girl that made it through the New York audition. We were being flown to France to have a second audition with a smaller group of girls. There might have been 20 in total, 15. This girl was a fantastic singer. She had a heavy gospel background and just an amazing command of her voice. But I had made a really horrible mistake. I had taken an envelope that had my ticket to fly to France and my taxi voucher and put it with a bunch of bills that were in my purse, and I'd put them in the mailbox, like right before I was supposed to leave. So I called this girl and I told her, I've made a mistake. I need to figure out another way to get there, blah, blah, blah. She could care less. She was not nice. She didn't offer to do anything to be helpful to me. I managed to get there because someone that knew me from Pink Floyd was working for the Stones, and so she got me another ticket, and I made the audition. But when I went to the audition and it came down to Mick asked me about her and another girl, I said, well, that one girl, she's a really great singer, but she's not a very nice person. And he said, well, the thing is, when you're going to be on tour with people for a few months, you want to be with people that you can get along with that are nice. And she lost out on an opportunity that could have taken her to a whole nother stratosphere because I think she was that talented. And I think that they would have helped nurture her name like how they did with Lisa Fisher.
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of the best pieces of advice I got really early on during a clinic with Gordon Goodwin's Big Fat Band. One of their trombone players, I think it was Andy, mentioned that, one of the best things you can do for yourself, especially as someone who's trying to break into the industry, is just be someone people want to work with. If
Right.
you aren't as talented a player as some of the other people on the audition roster, but you're also just a riot to be around, everyone
Right.
loves you, you have just as good a shot as that insanely virtuosic player who's, a
Absolutely.
huge dick, like you mentioned, just
Hmm.
because, sure, you might need to brush your chops up a bit, but you'll have plenty of time to do that on a tour. Your personality isn't going to improve drastically over the course of 6 months.
Right.
Personal improvement takes more time than musical improvement. Sad fact.
Yeah. I mean, because she really didn't look that rock and roll diva part because she had braids, but they weren't very nice. And I said, you guys can fix all that because they had plenty of money and they spent it. We had designer clothes. They took us shopping in Azadina Laya's personal shop. I mean, you probably don't know who that was, but that guy, he has designed gowns for some of the biggest stars.
Oh,
Um, so
I've seen enough rock and roll documentaries to have a good idea of what the tour expenses were. They
yeah,
they were not slight.
no, the money was no issue as far as if somebody needed a makeover, they could afford to do it. But that is what it comes down to: is you have to know how to get along with people. One of the most important things that Nick Venet taught me was when it comes to who you're going to work with, whether it be an attorney that you're hiring, a manager to represent you. Um, Make sure that those are people that you want to see. Like if you go to, do you want to have lunch or dinner with that person? Because if you don't like their company, that personality is representing you. So
Mm-hmm.
it's the same thing about yourself. Do you want to be the kind of person that people want to be around? Or are you drawing the wrong kind of attention your way? That's very important.
Yeah, and I mean, like, in an industry as perilous around legalism as music, you want to have frequent contact with your managers, your A&Rs, your agents. You want to make sure you're not being embezzled. And if
Right.
they're
Well,
if
yeah,
they're
that too.
constantly like way off in the periphery, you're giving them a lot more opportunity to do something like that. So you need to make sure that they're well vetted if you're going to try and be that distance, because
Right.
you're putting yourself at risk in a big way if you don't have those relationships.
Hmm.
So my last question for you is, what is the work you are most proud of playing on and why?
You mean as far as something that's recorded that I did?
Recorded or live show, just like, what is the one thing where, 20 years from now, you want to look back and say like, yeah, I did that,
The video of my sister and I singing Great Gig in the Sky together with the Australian Pink Floyd. She had come as a guest to visit me on the tour, and they had said that she could sing in the show, and so they decided to let us do it together. And she had the idea that at the end, we would trail each other in a harmony, which no one had ever done before. And when you look at us doing it, I'm looking at her, we're trading lines in the third section of the song. I sing one, she sings one, I sing one, she sings one. But there's a sincerity because it was really spontaneous in that moment. We hadn't rehearsed it over and over again. We did it in that moment. And then she hugged me at the end, and it was really sweet. And that's had over 1 million views, and I'm really proud of it. We sound great. And of course, the band plays beautifully, and it's just really, really great.
Yeah, wow. I feel inspired to go find that on YouTube after this.
Yeah, just look up Lorelei and Durga McBroom, or Durga and Lorelei McBroom, and it'll come up.
Sounds good to me. Alrighty, before we let you go, here's your space to promote yourself. Give us the works. What do you want us to go check out?
Well, the most important thing is the McBroomSisters.com. The website is McBroomSisters.com. We're raising money to finish the album that we started. We started this album in 2013, for God's sake. But between her touring, my touring, and our producer, we are constantly all over the place, and it's been very hard to get us together. However, we've recorded, excuse me, some of our favorite Pink Floyd songs as well as original songs, and it's a good project. And there's a way on there to donate to the project to get a little taste. There's some clips of stuff that is from the album and a little bit about our histories in the music business. We made a little video explaining who we are and why we're doing it and who's guesting and stuff like that. So that's my most important one, is McBroomSisters.com.
Excellent. Well, everyone, I can vouch. I've heard a couple of the songs she's putting together. They're really great so far. Can't wait to see how they turn out in final production. If you're interested in seeing what she can do live, be sure to check out AustralianPinkFloydShow.com. Get their tour dates. Go see them. You won't regret it, I promise. That is all for now. Oh,
sorry. Also, on the McBroom Sisters website, there's a page where we talk about the other tours that we're doing. If I'm not with the Australian Pink Floyd, I tour in Italy with my sister. I've toured in Latin America with my sister, Brazil, in Guatemala, Argentina. So the schedule of other places that I would be will be there.
Yes, she has some very nice Facebook feed pictures. I enjoy seeing them quite a bit. Alrighty, everybody. That is all for now. Thank you so much if you made it to the end, and see you next time.
Thanks, Carter.